My dead ex-boyfriend is stalking me. It turns out he never really died at all. Any woman who has ever spurned a man's advances already knows my story. Rejecting someone you have known and loved is, I think, even more perilous than rejecting a stranger. Edward and I dated for 6 months. He was an exceptional man in so many ways, but he soon revealed his contemptible side, and that soured the relationship. Signaled by numerous red flags, I broke up with him. He couldn't accept that. His relentless pursuit began. The monstrous man had veiled his true evil for so many months. I think he'd been aching to free it. His vengeance was savage and unyielding. Threatening social media posts, candid photos he'd taken of me, an emailed schedule of my family's movements, a restraining order did nothing to stop him. Nevertheless, after months of fear, the horrendous stalking came to a bitter end. In December, Edward drove his Ford Mustang off a cliff. His body was never recovered. Cards on the table, Edward wasn't even his real name, and I'm not exactly sure why I'm protecting his identity given what he's done to me. I guess I'm still scared of him. Understandable given that even death hasn't halted his heinous hunt. I would have endured so many of his shortcomings had he not struck me across the face on one particular evening. Abuse was the line. Edward apologized profusely, of course, but the longer I ignored him, the more violent his messages grew. After his death last month, I thought the torture would cease. It did for a couple of weeks, but then awful things started happening. Edward, nice sunset, Natasha. That was his comment on a recent Instagram picture of me. My friends flooded my DMs asking whether I thought Edward's account had been hacked. Obviously, what an asinine question. The man was dead. It had to be somebody's perverse prank. But I'd blocked Edward's account, which made the whole ordeal quite traumatizing for me. I thought somebody had bypassed Instagram security. That made me feel vulnerable. I contacted Instagram about it. They apologized, suspended his account, and I thought that was the end of it. The comments persisted, however, and it wasn't just happening on Instagram. It was happening on every one of my social accounts. I believed that somebody was tormenting me, maybe one of Edward's relatives who blamed me for his untimely death. I told the police, and they promised to conduct a thorough investigation. Yeah, right. I was a little shaken, but the true terror was only just beginning. The cyber harassment had stirred some of my old trauma and fear, but I felt resilient. Nobody could scare me as much as Edward, and Edward was dead. I was convinced that it was some idiot with a vile vendetta. It was what happened a week ago that filled me with fear unlike any I've ever experienced. One night, I was lying in bed, and a ping from my laptop startled me. It was open on my desk, less than a foot from the end of my bed. I certainly hadn't left it open, and I hadn't left it switched on for that matter. And I certainly hadn't opened Facebook on my browser. Who even uses Facebook anymore? The screen was scrolling by itself. Somebody's hacked my computer. That was my first thought. The mystery hacker was looking at Edward's profile. The scrolling stopped, and I found myself staring at an old photo of Edward and me at a party. It was from the early days of our relationship. We looked happy. I get it, Ryan, I murmured, assuming Edward's brother to be behind the torture. It's my fault that he's dead. And then something horrifying happened. The photo moved. To be more specific, Edward moved. I, like everything and everyone else in that picture, remained static, but Edward, suddenly untethered, strolled over to the photographer. He was engulfing every square inch of the full-screen photo. My dead ex-boyfriend was staring through the laptop screen, staring at me. What the fuck is this? I cried breathlessly. Hello, Natasha, Edward said. I turned around and screamed. Standing in my bedroom doorway, risen from the dead, was my psychopathic ex-boyfriend. Before I had an opportunity to process what was happening, the light had been switched off and the darkened figure lurched towards me. I fell off my desk chair, shrieking as Edward proceeded to beat me ferociously. As his hands clasped my neck and I struggled to scream, he smiled at me in the most maliciously inhuman way. I could barely make out his features in my lightless bedroom, but moonlight revealed just enough of his face to haunt my dreams. Did you really think I was talking to you from beyond the grave? He whispered. I knew you never listened to me when I told you about the wonders of AI technology. And did you really think I'd kill myself for you? Please, you should die for me. You never knew how lucky you were, and I'm not going to sit by idly watching as you move on to some lesser man. Your path ends here. Eyesight fading, I caught a glimpse of something on the carpet. One of my stilettos, the slutty shoes that Edward had forbade me from wearing, and hurled at the floor in anger. He had sealed his own fate. I clutched the weapon and exhausted the last of my energy, swinging it at my attacker's neck. He screamed in agony as the sharp tool plunged into his skin, lodging itself in the bloody cavity it had created. My abusive ex fell to the floor, wailing and clutching his wound. I seized my opportunity to run out of the bedroom and flee the flat. I have been living in my car for the past few days. I'm currently in a computer cafe. There are plenty of people around, and I don't think Edward would come for me in a public place, but who knows? I need help. I don't know where to go or what to do. I have nightmares of Edward. He could be waiting on any street corner, and he certainly lives in every corner of my mind. He's everywhere. To protect myself, I'm going to use pseudonyms for everybody involved. Escaping an abuser is usually something to be lauded, but I fear that my troubles have only just begun, and I don't know how long I'm going to be able to savor my newfound freedom. "You can just walk out of that door," Trent said. "Nobody's stopping you." "Just like that?" I asked. "No catch?" My then boyfriend shrugged. "You won't face any consequences from me, but..." "Don't say it," I scowled. "Don't blame it on your brothers or your mother. They enable you, but you're the one who's kept me captive." "I helped you get off the drugs, you junkie," Trent coldly said. "You'd be lying in a ditch if not for me." That wasn't true, but I used to believe it. That's how Trent had kept me prisoner for so long. When I eventually summoned the courage to leave, I'd expected resistance. I suppose I should have expected a collected demeanor from the conniving sociopath. He was a man who instilled fear into his family members with serene, seemingly harmless words. For years, I'd watched them follow his every word, even as I pleaded for release. But with me, it was different. He showed me his true evil. I would spend weeks at a time chained to the bed if I did so much as looked at him in the wrong way or uttered a word which displeased him. And most of the things which took place in that room, which was mostly lightless for weeks on end, would sicken you. "It's quiet time," Trent whispered in the dark. I screamed as he began to thread a needle through my lips, stitching them together. He would eventually unstitch them when I'd been a good girl in the darkness for a few weeks. But I always knew that I'd have to relive that horror. I always ended up back in the room. As I strolled through the door of his filthy family trailer, situated in the middle of nowhere, I finally felt free. Not just free of the trailer, free of Trent. That's all I'd ever wanted. But I was naive to believe that I'd truly closed that chapter. After so many years under his spell, why should I have believed that he'd let me simply walk out of the door? Beneath it all, he was no more than a possessive abuser. His family, donning matching gray overalls like some demented cult, stood and watched me from the windows of the trailer, watching with a silent stillness that sent icy waves through my body as I wandered through an endless field that kept turning around to face the campsite I'd left behind. 4 years in that prison. It felt surreal. I couldn't believe that I'd finally reclaimed my life, or so I thought. Wandering into a tranquil nearby village, I was a little disconcerted to find that there were scarce signs of life. Where on earth were the warm, welcoming arms of civilization? It was a ghost town. I won't tell you the name of the place. I don't want anybody to go searching for Trent's family. Anyway, it makes sense that the town was so lifeless. That's probably why Trent took me there. Back when I was so stoned that I wasn't aware of my surroundings or the day of the week. No wonder I had no idea where I'd been living. And there was nobody around to help me. The few people I did see were frightened of me. "Excuse me," I called. An elderly lady eyed my attire from head to toe and scarpered. I was wearing shabby overalls, much like the members of Trent's family. Perhaps the villagers knew I'd come from there. Maybe they didn't want to touch Trent's whack job family with a 10-foot pole. I couldn't blame them. Curtains drew rapidly as I strolled down an eerily empty residential street. One man shrieked and darted into his house, slamming the door behind him. Trent's reputation preceded him, I suppose. I know that he and his brothers often boasted about terrorizing the poor folks of the village on their excursions. When I turned a corner onto another residential road, I yelped in horror. One of Trent's brothers, Paul, was standing at the far end of the deserted street in his gray overalls. For a moment, I thought it was Trent, but Paul had a meek stature, and my ex-boyfriend had a looming, intimidating form. Why do you think I'd been scared to flee him for so many years? Why do you think his family members did everything he said? I expected Paul to beeline towards me, but he didn't. The unsettling figure simply stood and watched. And then the menacing man lifted his arm as if it were a limp, useless appendage. One outstretched index finger pointed at an alleyway. Before I could process what was happening, my stalker fled from sight. He didn't enter the passageway, but I still had no intention of following the route he had marked for me. I turned on my heel and walked another way through the town. I'd been searching for a police station, but the village didn't seem to have one. It was no more than a few houses, a church, and a shop. I found the road leading out of town, but I had no idea where it went. Boundless countryside stretched toward the horizon, and when I turned around, I screamed in horror. There was Trent, standing before me. He wore a sick, twisted smile. "What makes you so special, Sophie?" Trent snarled, pacing towards me as I crept backwards. "You think you're better than me? You were lucky to have a roof over your head." I whimpered, shielding myself with outstretched hands. You're sick, Trent. You need help." "No, Sophie," Trent said, smiling. "You need help." He lunged forwards, knocking me to the tarmac of the deserted road. I struggled to shriek for help as Trent wrapped his strong, unyielding hands around my neck. Nothing came out but a feeble gasp of air, but I knew there was no point in trying. The villagers had made it abundantly clear that they wanted nothing to do with his freakish trailer park family. "You need me," Trent angrily insisted, squeezing the life out of me. "I won't let you escape from me. I'll stitch those eyelids and lips together. Maybe I'll burst out your eardrums too. See no evil, speak no evil, and hear no evil." And there was the truth. Trent's admission that he'd been holding me prisoner for years. He continued to rant and rave about my spineless disposition as I weakly reached for the pocket knife that I'd stolen and concealed in my pocket. You see, I'd known that some sort of altercation was going to ensue. I knew Trent would come after me. Bloodshed was my only real path to freedom. I plunged the blade into the side of his throat, and he unleashed an unholy wail, splattering flecks of blood onto my face. He rolled onto his side, crawling across the road, whilst I gasped for air. I felt faint. My throat was bruised and swollen, but I was alive. I hurriedly scrambled to my feet, and that was when I saw something truly horrifying. His brothers in a tight formation were striding down the road towards me, but I'd eyed my form of escape, a bicycle, propped against the brickwork of a nearby house. I sprinted for it, clumsily hopped onto the seat, and pedaled away, wobbling as I went. One of the brothers started to move with a little more animation, but it was useless. I was already off. I rode out of that hellhole, and I didn't stop pedaling until I reached the next town. I escaped that trailer prison, and I can only assume Trent died, but the police found only his bloodstains on the road. No body. The family trailer has been abandoned. I don't know where they've gone, but I sleep with one eye open.
We all mourned his death, even my mom and dad. He was like the perfect son-in-law for them, always attending to their needs and whatnot. On September 5th, 2020, Bruce got hit by a truck while attempting to rescue a baby sparrow that had fallen on the road. He breathed his last breath in my arms while I screamed at him to hold on a little longer. My only wish was to see him smile at me one last time. Little did I know that my wish would come true 1 year after his death. My name is Rachel and I'm 25. My boyfriend's passing dealt a huge blow to me and I thought I would never recover from it. It wasn't until I met Andrew who was able to fill up that hole that had been created in my heart. He helped me through this hard phase and I ended up marrying him on September 3rd, 2021, just 2 days before the date that marked 1 year of my old boyfriend's death. That night at around 11 p.m., I was looking at the moon from my bedroom window, sipping a cup of tea. I was thinking how Andrew had changed my life for the better, and the thought brought a smile on my face. I took another sip and looked at the neighboring houses. Everyone had mostly gone to bed, and only the streetlights outside brought any source of light. I set the empty cup on the table and was about to go to bed when I noticed someone standing in the porch of the house exactly opposite ours. It was pretty dark outside and I could only make out an opaque shape. I squinted my eyes to see if I could penetrate the darkness to get a better look at the person, but to no avail. I could tell that whoever it was looking directly at my bedroom window. I was feeling uneasy, so I called out to Andrew, who was busy in the study working on his project. "What is it, dear? Do you need something?" His head popped into the doorway. "Not really. There is someone standing outside the house opposite us, and he's giving me these weird vibes," I said. "It must be our neighbor, Frank. He usually forgets where he keeps his door keys when he goes out." I'm not sure. The guy is facing directly towards our house. Let me have a look, said Andrew as he made his way to the window. The guy hadn't moved since I last saw him. He was still in darkness, so making out his face was still difficult. I'll give Frank a call to see if he is... Andrew was cut short when a car passed by and its headlights revealed the person who was standing there. My mouth dropped open as I realized who it was. The person standing there had brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a black t-shirt. It was Bruce, and he had the biggest grin on his face. I took a step back, trying to process what I had seen. That was definitely Bruce standing there, but how was he alive? Rachel, didn't you say that Bruce got hit by a truck and died afterwards? Asked Andrew. His eyes still hadn't left Bruce. I was too stunned to answer. I clearly remember that I was there when he was buried. I even went to his grave several times after. I know you won't lie to me about something like this, but that Bruce looks far from dead to me, stated Andrew. His voice wasn't angry. He sounded confused. I had shown Andrew a picture of Bruce once, so that's why he recognized him. I escaped a glance outside the window, and sure enough, Bruce was still standing there. He hadn't moved an inch. Andrew drew the curtain so that we don't have to look at Bruce's smiling face. I'm calling the cops on him, he said as he dialed in the number. I think we shouldn't. He's not doing anything. I somehow managed to find my voice. Andrew looked in the direction of the window and sighed. If he continues this weird act tomorrow, then I'm letting the cops deal with him. For now, let's just get to bed. I nodded in agreement and went to bed with him. Tomorrow morning, Bruce was gone. I was relieved that he was gone. It must have been our imagination or something, because Bruce was dead and we couldn't have possibly seen him last night. Or so I thought. The day went on normally. Andrew spent the day talking to travel agents and booked us a trip to Hawaii for the 6th of September for our honeymoon. I spent most of the time packing our luggage and completely forgot the events of last night. After dinner, I went to my room to open the window to let in some fresh air. I pushed open the curtains and almost screamed. Bruce was standing next to our fence directly under a streetlight. He had moved from yesterday's position and was much closer to our house now. Just like yesterday, he had a giant smile on his face. He stood there, never blinking an eye. I shouted and called for Andrew. He came running in, and seeing Bruce from the window, he quickly took out his phone. That's it, you creep. I'm calling the cops. I stepped away from the window, my heart racing now. A few minutes later, we heard the doorbell. It was the cops. Andrew explained to them about Bruce and them both to where Bruce was standing. I watched all of this from the window. Officer, I would like you to arrest this creep. He has been stalking us since yesterday, said Andrew, who pointed at Bruce. The police officers looked in the direction of Bruce, having a confused expression on their face. Look, son, are you trying to pull a prank on us? You do know such things could get you in real trouble, stated one of the policemen. If not, then I suggest you to stop drinking at this hour. It causes your mind to go bananas so you imagine stuff, said the other. I stared in horror. What do they mean by that? Don't they see Bruce standing right next to them? Andrew was just as confused as I was. Officer, the man I'm talking about is right next to you. Arrest him. Look, son, I already told you that such pranks are no good. If you wanted to make us waste our time, then at least make up something good, warned the policeman. Let's get moving, Drew. Kids these days, said the other. Both officers went back to their car and drove away. The most frightening part of this entire exchange was that Bruce hadn't moved an inch during it. He kept his eyes towards me, completely disregarding what was going on around him. He had a giant smile on his face throughout. Look here, if you come to my house again, you'll regret it, warned Andrew. Bruce, once again, acted like he hadn't heard a thing. He kept his gaze fixed on me. Andrew came back inside in complete disbelief. I have no idea what's going on. Why did the officers think I was going crazy when Bruce was right in front of them? Andrew kept on mumbling. I drew the curtains, taking one last look outside. Bruce was standing exactly where he was, smiling. Night went and morning came. Today was the day when Bruce had died exactly a year ago. Due to the recent events, I was scared to go and visit his grave. Me and Andrew discussed about last night's events, that how the police officers completely ignored Bruce, like he wasn't even there. We came up with no logical explanation for it, so we gave up. We finished packing for our honeymoon after that. That night, I was terrified to even go near the window. We made sure all the windows and doors were locked. Andrew went outside the room to recheck the door locks. I was a bit curious, so I went to the window to get a peek outside. I lifted the curtain and screamed. Bruce was standing directly outside the window, smiling. Andrew came running in and pulled me away from the window. I was shaking terribly at this point. My scream must have been really loud because a few neighbors came over to check in on us. We told them about Bruce and his weird smiling. They went to check that area, and to our utter shock, they too completely ignored Bruce, who was standing in plain sight. It seemed like only me and Andrew were able to see. Once again, Bruce showed no interest in the people around him and kept his gaze at the window. The neighbors went back after a few minutes. They must have thought we were going crazy. That night, we hardly slept. We had no idea if Bruce would try anything since he was directly outside our house. Both of us kept watch. Morning came by slowly. Andrew parted the curtain, and Bruce gone by that time. We had our flight in a few hours, so we made our way to the airport. Both me and Andrew were super sleepy, so we decided to sleep on the plane. We boarded the plane and found our seats. Let's start our new life from this moment onwards. The last few days were weird, and I want to leave that behind, said Andrew. I nodded in agreement, satisfied. Andrew took out an eye mask and quickly dozed off. I was surprised by Andrew's ability to sleep so quickly. The plane was about to take off. I took one last look outside the window and felt like my heart stopped. Standing next to the ground marshal was Bruce, and he was smiling.